Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So there have been a ton of sets and an absurd amount of cards coming out lately, and to be completely honest, it's kind of hard to keep track of. So some things got lost in the shuffle, but recently I was reminded about a card from Modern Horizons 2, and let me tell you, this card and others like it are fantastic with Codie Vociferous Codex. It's to the point where you can do some incredibly broken things very easily with a deck built around Codie. And actually, because of some of these cards, the possibilities of the kinds of decks that you can build around Codie are somewhat limitless. So even though I already built a deck around Codie focusing on cycling creatures and casting Living End to get them all back, well, I had to jump back into Codie because of these exciting new cards that work incredibly well with it. So with all that said, let's jump into Codie and what exactly these new cards are. So, Codie Vociferous Codex is a 1/4 construct for 3 mana that says you can't cast permanent spells. So yeah, that's a major downside, but let's move on to the next part. By paying 4 and tapping Codie, we add Wooburg. Then when we cast our next spell this turn, we exile cards from the top of our library until we exile an instant or sorcery card with lesser mana value. Until the end of the turn, we can cast that card without paying its mana cost, and then we put each other card exiled this way on the bottom of our library in a random order. So, Codie doesn't let us cast any permanent spells when it's in play, so again, yeah, like I said, that is quite the downside. But to more than make up for that, Codie gives us a kind of instant/sorcery cascade thingy. That's about as well as I can describe it. Basically, we cast a spell and then we get a slightly smaller spell off the top of our library. Now, where this can be incredibly broken is with cards that have no mana value. Basically, if we tap Codie, get that mana, and cast a 1 mana spell, well, we have to get something that costs less than that, which would be 0. And if we only include one of those cards in our deck, well, then we're guaranteed to hit that card. Now with that previous Codie deck that I mentioned, Living End was such a card, and that was the card that the deck revolved around. It's a sorcery that has no mana cost, so most of the time you'd have to suspend 3 it for 2 black, but again with Codie, we don't have to. So essentially you cast your 1 mana spell with Codie, you reveal cards from the top until you hit this, and then you get back all those cycled creatures into play. And thanks to Modern Horizons 2, we've got even more exciting and pretty much broken 0 mana cards that we can build around with Codie. In that set, we've got one of each color, and let's just start off with Resurgent Belief, Gaia's Will, and Glimpse of Tomorrow. Again, each of these are sorceries that cost 0 mana and have a suspend cost, but again, we don't really care about that suspend cost. Resurgent Belief says return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is a one-sided mass reanimation effect for enchantments. So yeah, if we can fill our graveyard with a ton of enchantments, when we're ready, we can just cast a 1 mana spell and have some fun to get them all back. And there are definitely plenty of game-ending plays that can happen with this card. Speaking of which, Gaia's Will says, until end of turn, you may play lands and cast spells from your graveyard. If a card be put in your graveyard from anywhere this turn, exile that card instead. So this is a guaranteed hit Yawgmoth's Will in a Codie deck. And Yawgmoth's Will is a $300 card for a reason. So have fun getting an absurd amount of value out of the things out of your graveyard, and yeah, you can build an awesome Storm deck with this type of a card. But for a completely different build, let's talk about Glimpse of Tomorrow. It says shuffle all permanents you own into your library, then reveal that many cards from the top of your library, put all non-aura permanent cards revealed this way onto the battlefield, then do the same for aura cards, then put the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. So to be completely honest, I actually just paused my recording, stopped what I was doing, and worked to build a deck around this, because yeah, that can be really sweet. Now, obviously it depends on the way that you want to build around this specific card, but the way that I chose to was to, well, make a ton of tokens. I'm talking about an absurd amount of tokens, and then use Codie to cast this. Although tokens aren't really shuffled in your library, they do count, and yes, I double checked on the rules on that. So then for essentially every single permanent that you have in play, which is basically, well, you know, your lands and your tokens, you're going to get permanents off the top of your library. And again, with an absurd amount of tokens in play, that's a ton. Now, I decided to just include a lot of big X spells in the deck, so every single permanent in the deck is actually just a land. So this can basically just get all the lands in your deck out into play, and keep in mind that they're coming to play untapped. So then cast some giant X spells to, you know, draw more cards, make more tokens, or, you know, just cast Villainous Wealth and get a lot of things off the top of an opponent's library. There's a lot of fun that can be had here. Or, you know, in that same build, if you're not looking to go budget, feel free to just include some Eldrazi and annihilate your opponents. Literally. Regardless, though I did just work on that deck, it is not finalized, and today's episode is not on Glimpse of Tomorrow, although I just talked about it for probably far too long, so my apologies. I'm really excited about Codie and this card, and yeah. Regardless, this episode also is not about Profane Tutor, which is the black 0-mana sorcery from Modern Horizons 2. That being said, this is the card that makes it so that Codie decks essentially have unlimited possibilities on really what they can be built around. Profane Tutor is a very simple card. Again, it's got Suspend 2 for 1 and a black. It costs 0 and it says, search your library for a card, put that card in your hand, then shuffle. So as long as you've got a decent amount of 1-mana instants and sorceries in your deck, you can pretty much build your deck around any singular card, and you're pretty much guaranteed to get it. Again, you utilize Codie to cast that 1-mana spell, and then you basically cascade off the top of your deck until you hit this, you cast it, you get the card your deck's built around, and you have fun. I mean, one off-the-wall idea I had for this is building a deck around turning your lands into creatures with something like Sylvan Awakening. Sylvan Awakening says, until your next turn, all lands you control become 2/2 elemental creatures with reach, indestructible, and haste. They're still lands. So before you go and activate Codie, you ramp a ton, you get a lot of lands in play, then you activate Codie, cast that 1-mana spell, get the Profane Tutor, get this, then cast it. So then every single one of your lands becomes a creature, an indestructible creature with haste and reach. And then what you can do is utilize a lot of untapped spells like Vitalize. It's a very simple spell that's an instant that costs a green, and it says untap all creatures you control. So not only does Codie untap, but now all of your lands untap, because again, your lands are creatures until the end of the turn. So you get all your mana back, and then you can activate Codie again for another cascade effect, and you can just keep doing this again and again and again as long as you've got the cards to keep untapping your commander and your lands. Then maybe you cast a tutor like Firemind's Foresight and get the right cards that you need for the situation that you're in, or you just win the game from there. So this completely off-the-wall deck built around a card like Sylvan Awakening is again completely possible because Codie makes it so. Or I guess Codie and Profane Tutor make it so. Though, do keep in mind that Codie doesn't let you cast permanent spells, so if you want to build a deck around a permanent card, consider some ways to get rid of Codie either temporarily or permanently so you can actually continue on. Regardless, the deck that I built for today's episode is actually none of these 0-mana spells that we've talked about so far, and it's actually going to be, of course, the golden pig of the deck that we're talking about, and it is Inevitable Betrayal. Inevitable Betrayal is a sorcery that costs 0 mana, and it's got Suspend 3 for 1 blue. It says, search target opponent's library for a creature card and put that card onto the battlefield under your control, then that player shuffles. Essentially, it's a suspended 0 mana cost version of Bribery. And this card can be incredibly powerful, but unlike the other 0 mana spells we've talked about today, this one is heavily dependent on our opponent's decks. In fact, it's entirely dependent on them. Whereas all the other 0 mana spells that we've talked about today are basically, hey, build an entire deck around this incredibly powerful effect. This one is more so, hey, let's hope your opponents have some really powerful creatures. Now, most of the time, that's going to be the case. And actually, because of the limiting factor of your opponent's decks, that's really why I built around this one instead of the other ones. I guess I should say originally, because again, like I said, Glimpse of Tomorrow is something that I'm building currently. Regardless. Anyways, I think that this card is a lot of fun, and you know what's really fun? Casting it over and over again. I wanted to build a Codie deck that gets the most value out of this card, just basically going through your opponent's libraries and stealing their best creatures and then beating them with their best creatures. Now, obviously, again, depending on what creatures are in your opponent's libraries, you can have some massive plays early on in the game. I'm talking like a turn 4 Blightsteel Colossus game-ending play. In fact, on turn 4 with the right setup, we can get up to 3 creatures out of our opponent's libraries, and yeah, that's pretty brutal. Good luck to your opponents if you get the 3 best creatures into play right away. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen all the time, and you very well might pick the wrong player and whiff, but that's kind of the fun of this card. And this deck can even be powerful and fun on a very restricted budget. Because in this deck, aside from one card, and we'll talk about that card when we get to it and why I made an exception for that one, every single card in this deck is less than $1. So with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, we're going to be running an absurd amount of 1-mana spells in this deck. I'm talking over 30 spells that are 1 mana. And these first ones, although they might not seem like much, are incredibly impactful in this deck. Lay of the Land, Reclaim the Waste, and Open the Gates essentially do the exact same thing. They're 1-mana sorceries that get us a basic land into our hand. My goal with this deck is to consistently activate Codie on turn 4 and cast Inevitable Betrayal. That means that we have to hit our land drops on turn 3 and turn 4 to get Codie out and then to activate. And again, we need that 1-mana spell to ensure that we're getting to Inevitable Betrayal. So, though these cards don't ramp us, they do fill a much-needed role. So we're also going to be running Attune with Aether and Caravan Vigil, which essentially do the exact same thing, and then Commune with Dinosaurs lets us get a land off the top 5 cards of our library. Chances are incredibly likely that there's at least 1 land off the top 5. Next up, there's Abundant Harvest, which says choose land or non-land, reveal cards in the top of your library to reveal a card of the chosen kind, and then we get that into our hand. So this card is actually pretty incredible in this deck. Early on, if we needed to go get a land, we can do so, but later on in the game, when we have all of our lands and all of our fixing, this is basically just a cantrip that is guaranteed to get a non-land. And then next up, we're also going to be utilizing Safe Right Quest and Flower and Flourish. Safe Right Quest and Flower are both going to get us a forest or a plains. And then Flourish, if we happen to need that side of it, it says creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. But next up, we also have a free spell to cast though with Land Grant. Land Grant lets us cast it for free if we've got no lands in our hand, and it lets us go get a forest. Next up, let's talk about the ramp spells that we're utilizing in this deck with things like Search for Tomorrow, Rampant Growth, and Edge of Autumn. Search for Tomorrow has a spend 2 for a green, and it's going to get us a basic into play untapped, and then Rampant Growth and Edge of Autumn both get us a land into play tapped. Again, we need to get Codie out on turn 3 consistently, so every single ramp card in this deck costs less than 3, or at least I should say we can utilize it for less than 3, because again, Search for Tomorrow has to spend 2 for a green. So we're also going to be utilizing Emergent Sequence, Explore, and Growth Spiral. Emergent Sequence gets us a basic into play tapped, and it turns into a creature. And then on top of drawing us a card, Explore and Growth Spiral also get us a land into play from our hand. Next up, let's talk about the MDFC Tangled Florahedron. This is the only non-land permanent outside of Codie that we're running in the entire deck. Again, Codie says, hey, you can't cast permanent spells, and we want to get Codie out and keep it out, so we're not going to be relying heavily on permanents. Or at least I should say non-land permanents, but Tangled Florahedron is a nice exception. This can be a fantastic way for us to ramp on turn 2 by getting this mana dork down. But if we don't need to utilize it for a ramp, or if Codie's already in play, we can still utilize it as a land by just playing as a land that comes into play tapped and taps for a green. But this isn't the only MDFC that we're going to be utilizing. We've also got Solemn Vision, Spikefield Hazard, and Vastwood Fortification. Solemn Vision lets us get an instant or sorcery out of the top 6 cards of our library and put it into our hand. And then Spikefield Hazard and Vastwood Fortification are basically just 1-mana cards, and again, we need those for Codie. And obviously, again, because these are MDFCs, if we need them as lands, we've got them. And some extra flexibility for this deck is definitely not a bad thing. Regardless, let's say if things go to plan and we get Codie out on turn 3, then activate on turn 4 and cast a 1-mana spell to get Inevitable Betrayal. How do we make it even more impactful? Well, we're going to double up that spell with things like Dual Strike, Teach by Example, and Double Cast. Each of these spells can copy our Golden Pig and get us an extra creature out of one of our opponent's decks. As long as we don't need to cast a ramp spell on turn 2, we can foretell Dual Strike, and then it's very easy for us to actually cast when we're casting Inevitable Betrayal. And then Teach by Example is also very easy for us to cast too, because it costs Is It, so as long as we've got a 1-mana spell that doesn't cost either blue or red, we're getting it. Again, Codie taps for Wooburg, so it really helps with something like this. Whereas Double Cast costs red though, so it's actually harder for us to cast. But we can still get it on turn 4 if we happen to ramp on turn 2. and if we've got a red mana outside of the 4 mana that we utilize to activate Codie. But next up, we've got some cards that can actually help us get multiple copies of our Golden Pig with things like Howl of the Horde, Increasing Vengeance, and Repeated Reverberation. Although Howl of the Horde does cost 3 mana in total, because it costs 2 generic and a red, it's actually going to be really easy for us to cast on turn 4. It says, whenever you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. But it also has Raid, so if you attack with a creature this turn, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell initial time, you may choose new targets for the copy. So on turn 4, yes, if we cast this, we're not going to be attacking with Codie and activating Codie. Usually not. That's going to be very difficult for us to do. Regardless, later on in the game, when we've got some of our opponent's creatures, we can obviously attack with them and take advantage of that raid. And then Increasing Vengeance can also copy it either once or twice if we flashed it back. And then Repeated Reverberation copies our next instant or sorcery spell twice every time. So if we ramped on turn 2, got Codie out on 3, and activated on 4 and have an extra red available, this is the way that we get 3 creatures on turn 4 from our opponent's libraries. And actually, aside from copying the spell, we can actually copy the creature that we get with Replicate. It lets us create a token that's a copy of target creature we control. And having this attached to Repudiate, which can counter target activated or triggered ability, is nice as well. Again, like I said before, flexibility is never a bad thing. Now, obviously, even when things work out perfectly, there are things that we still need to consider. And when things don't work out perfectly, we need to make some considerations too. So first up, if Inevitable Betrayal is in our hand, some fantastic cards that can help us out are Kari Zev's Expertise, Reinterpret, and Brawl's Expertise. Kari Zev's Expertise is going to let us gain control of target creature or vehicle until end of turn. We untap it, it gains haste until end of turn, and we can cast a card with converted mana cost 2 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. And again, our Golden Pig costs 0, so yeah, we can cast it for free. So we basically steal a creature and cast the card out of our hand for free, letting us steal another creature, but this time permanently. And then Reinterpret says, counter target spell, you may cast a spell with an equal or lesser mana value from your hand without paying its mana cost. And yeah, again, our Golden Pig costs 0, so we're always going to hit that. Next up, Brawl's Expertise is going to bounce 3 target artifacts and or creatures back to the owner's hands, and then we can cast a card with converted mana cost 4 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. And obviously, keep in mind that if our Golden Pig is not in our hand, we can utilize these to cast a different spell if we want. But we can also get Inevitable Betrayal actually out of our hand with things like Brainstorm and Faithless Looting. Brainstorm has us draw 3, then put 2 cards from our hand on top of our library in any order. So again, we're getting it out of our hand and in our library so we can activate Codie to get it. And then Faithless Looting says draw 2, then discard 2, and it's got flashback for 2 and a red. Now, yes, our graveyard is definitely not the same as our library, and we definitely want to get Inevitable Betrayal into our library, but we've got ways to do that. So first up, let's talk about Reclaim and Not Forgotten. Reclaim's going to get target card from our graveyard on top of our library. And Not Forgotten says put target card from a graveyard on the top or bottom of its owner's library, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Next up, we also have plenty of ways to shuffle it into our library with things like Serene Remembrance, Dwell in the Past, and Stream of Thought. Serene Remembrance says shuffle it in up to 3 target cards from a single graveyard into their owner's libraries. And then Dwell in the Past and Stream of Thought are going to have us shuffle up to 4 cards from our graveyard into our library. And again, as 1 mana spells, these are fantastic in this deck. We've also got some shuffling effects at 2 mana with Gaia's Blessing, Blessed Respite, and Stream of Consciousness. Gaia's Blessing has us shuffle 3 cards and we draw a card. Blessed Respite is a fog effect that's going to have us shuffle our graveyard into our library. And then Stream of Consciousness has us shuffle up to 4 cards from our graveyard into our library. And then for just a bit more mana, we've got Reminisce, Clear the Mind, and Learn from the Past. Each of these is going to have target player shuffle their graveyard into their library, and then Clear the Mind and Learn from the Past have us draw us a card. Or, you know, we can also make everyone shuffle their graveyard into their library, which, yes, can most definitely hose some graveyard strategies. And finally, we've also got some flashback cards that can help us out too with Crows and Reclamation and Memory's Journey. Reclamation's going to have a shuffle up to 2, and Memory's Journey has a shuffle up to 3. So these can each help us get our Golden Pig back twice, which is huge. But we've got some more flashback cards that can help us out in different ways. So first up, let's talk about Artful Dodge and Defy Gravity. Artful Dodge is going to make target creature unblockable this turn, and Defy Gravity gives target creature flying until end of turn. And each of them have flashback for a blue. So these can help the creatures that we stole get through. But more importantly, we can utilize them twice for our commander. Again, to ensure that we're hitting our Golden Pig, we need 1 mana spells. So ones like these that we can cast multiple times are huge. But Raven's Crime is even better. It's a sorcery for a black that says target player discards a card, and it's got Retrace. Retrace means that we can cast this card from our graveyard by discarding a land and paying its cost. So this we can essentially cast as many times as we need to for as many lands in our hand that we have. It's essentially a permanent 1 mana spell that we have access to. And yeah, it can take out a player's hand as well by making them discard a lot of cards. And again, like Faithless Looting, if we need to ditch Inevitable Betrayal and shuffle it back into our library, we can just, target ourselves with this and make ourselves discard a card. So yeah, this card is pretty incredible in this deck. But next up, let's talk about some more 1 mana spells with some cantrips with Expedite, Cerulean Wisp, and Quicken. Expedite's gonna have target creature gain haste until end of turn, and like all these cantrips, of course, it's gonna draw us a card. And then Cerulean Wisp is a cantrip that can untap Codie. So we can utilize Codie twice in a single turn with this. And then Quicken says the next sorcery card you cast this turn can be cast as though it had flash. Inevitable Betrayal is a sorcery, but with this, we can actually cast it on an opponent's turn. We've also got some 1 mana X spells that can really help us out too with Epiphany of the Drownyard, Read the Runes, and Skeletal Scrying. Epiphany of the Drownyard is essentially a reverse Fact or Fiction, but for X. And then Read the Runes has us draw X cards, and then for each card drawn this way, we discard a card unless we sacrifice a permanent. Next up, there's Skeletal Scrying, which has us exile X cards from our graveyard, and then draw X cards and lose X life. So these spells can help fill our hand with the right cards that we need, and again, they're all 1 mana, so they can really help us out with our commander too. And 2 other 1 mana cards that can help us out in different ways though are Wildest Dreams and Pull from Eternity. Wildest Dreams costs XX and a green. It says return X art cards from your graveyard to your hand, exile Wildest Dreams. So this can help us get back the right cards that we need for the situation that we're in. And then Pull from Eternity is actually the 1 card in this entire deck that I made that budget exception for. Now this card's not incredibly expensive or anything, it's around $2, but again the budget restriction for the deck was that every card in the deck has to be less than $1, but again, except for this one. Now the reason that I made this exception is because of this. Its Oracle text reads, put target face-up exiled card into its owner's graveyard. Inevitable Betrayal getting exiled is the absolute worst thing that can happen to us with this deck. If that happens, Pull from Eternity is one of the very few ways to actually get it back. And if that does happen, and we really need to get to Pull from Eternity, we have some tutors that can help us out with Dizzy Spell and Invent. Dizzy Spell has a transmute cost of 1 blue, so basically we can discard it and then go get a card that costs 1. So this can help us out in a lot of situations, getting us pretty much whatever 1 mana card we need. And then Invent lets us search our library for an instant and or sorcery card, reveal them, and then put them into our hand, then shuffle our library. On top of that, it's got another half, which is Invert, which again is a 1 mana card. So yeah, our commander loves that. But now that we've talked about making sure that our plan goes off well, how do we throw a wrench into our opponent's plans? Let's start off with some 1 mana X spells like Heaven and By Force. Heaven's gonna deal X damage to each creature with flying, and it's actually got an aftermath with Earth, and it's gonna deal X damage to each creature without flying. And then By Force is gonna destroy X target artifacts. So again, if we need these for removal, we can utilize them for that, but if we need them for just 1 mana spells, we can do that too. And speaking of a 1 mana removal spell, let's talk about Nature's Claim. It's going to destroy target artifact or an enchantment, and its controller is going to gain 4 life. And then there's Statue, which is going to destroy target artifact, creature, or enchantment, and on top of that, it's got Status, which again is a 1 mana spell. Again, this deck has a lot of cards with a lot of flexibility, and speaking of flexibility, let's talk about Quandrix's command. It says choose 2, return target creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand, counter target artifact or enchantment spell, put 2/+1 counters on target creature, or target player shelves up to 3 target cards from their graveyard into their library. So obviously this can help us out in a lot of ways. But we've also got some ways to protect our things too, with things like Blacksmith Skill, Emerge Unscathed, and Ephemerate. Blacksmith Skill is going to give target permanent hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So this can easily help us save Codie or something that we stole. Speaking of which, there's Emerge Unscathed, which says target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, and it's got Rebound. And again, thanks to Rebound, we get to cast it twice. So we're also going to be running Ephemerate, which says exile target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control, and it's got Rebound. Now, keep in mind with Ephemerate, be careful and only utilize this on Codie because you don't want to give your opponents their creatures back. But again, getting this twice can be fantastic. Now, with these Rebound spells, Codie is kind of weird. According to the rules, Codie's activated ability is a mana ability. It can't be countered or responded to, and you can activate it while casting a spell. If you do, that spell is the next spell you cast this turn. So when we cast that rebounded spell for free at the beginning of our next upkeep, we can utilize Codie to get that trigger. So essentially, with these rebounded spells, we're getting 2 triggers for just 1 mana. But finally, let's talk about Autumn's Veil, which is another fantastic 1 mana instant. It says spells you control can't be countered by blue or black spells this turn, and creatures you control can't be the targets of blue or black spells this turn. Essentially, no countering my stuff. And now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. As I mentioned before, this deck was built on a strict budget restriction. Outside of the one card with Pull from Eternity, every single card in the deck is less than $1. So this deck is very budget friendly with the estimated cost of $29.71. And keep in mind that that includes basic lands at 10 cents a piece, and if you've already got those, well, that's a good amount of savings. Speaking of savings, this also doesn't include heavily played or damage cards on TCG players, so if you include those, it's going to be even lower. Though also make sure that you keep in mind that this does not include the cost of shipping, so that might vary depending on your location. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you, so make sure you comment below and let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.